Hey, how's it going? I am Samson Folk. This is the Raptors Weekly Podcast, and you're listening to this hopefully on a Monday or Tuesday. More draft content, as is the prerogative around this type of year. And guess what? We have more draft experts rolling in to talk about the prospective draft candidates with me. Today's Evin Gualberto, who is a notable, fantastic coach on the Eastern Coast, and also a recently joining the, I guess, public domain scout who's been doing all types of work covering these wonderful kids in college hooping. So, Evin Gualberto here to talk about Jaylin Williams, Ismael Kamagate, and Dalen Terry, at least for a little bit. So, Evin, my friend, my dear pal, how you doing?
Can't complain, hanging in, enjoying these, you know, draft pods that you're doing, enjoying your new blue background. I don't know how new that is, but it looks good. How are you?
uh, I recently, wouldn't it be funny if this was a sheet? Like if it wasn't, a wall,
Yeah,
if it
yeah.
was like it fell down behind me and revealed some sort of embarrassing poster. I'm doing good. I'm doing great. Yeah. I'm ready to talk about some basketball players. If you aren't aware, listener, viewer, there's the Raptors have worked out quite a few players. The list has changed a little bit, but if you want, you can go listen to myself and Francis Adu discuss 12 players that the Raptors could look at drafting. And also at the very start of that podcast, I list who the Raptors have worked out so far. So, yeah, let's start with Jalen Williams, not out of Auburn, but out of Arkansas, since there are two Jalen Williams in the SEC. And we're talking about the more notable one as far as having an NBA career, I think. So, yeah, Jalen Williams.
Yeah, Jalen Williams, Jaylin, Jalen Williams. My short sell to you, the reason I wanted to tackle him on your pod is, I mean, 6'10", which is, a little taller than the Raptors' usual 7'1" wingspan. It's fine, but he defends the rim like Kyle Lowry.
Okay, can you expand on that? How does one defend the rim
No,
like Kyle? How does
no.
one defend the rim like Kyle Lowry whilst
So
also being 6'10"?
he's super light on his feet. He's got great feel for how to set up and take charges. He averaged 1.1 blocks per game. Um, because he is a big man. But I think it was something like 70 charges in his time in Arkansas. He had, I think, something like 20 games where he drew more than one charge in a game. So yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to talk about him, because he's just I mean, he's drawing charges like Kyle Lowry. Like, it's prolific.
Okay, so what type of bigs is he playing next to? Is he the lone big? What's he doing at Arkansas? Is he a guy who's kind of rotating over and being sneaky about it, or is he the lone big and also taking charges? What's his role there?
So I mean, okay. I guess the best way to phrase it, and we can talk more about this in terms of, like, what scheme would he work best in. But he was largely a drop big, playing in deep drop. He has certain strengths and weaknesses, right? One of his biggest strengths is his willingness to take charges and his ability to recognize the situations and to get his feet set and to get into the right spots, whether he's a rotating help defender or he's playing his guy one on one and is able to draw the charge. He contorts his body and, like, takes charges at not necessarily the most conventional angles. I say that to say, like, you teach certain guys that, when they get to this spot, all you have to do is take two steps over. You're there, you take that charge. Like, most guys are used to that. That's why a lot of the time you'll see, especially in college, where um the big steps up and you could see like a quick Euro finish to get a layup. The interesting thing about him is that he sort of baits guys in the drop, or he notices when something is happening when he's in help side, and then he rotates over. So he takes charges from any number of positions. not the greatest athlete, but he utilizes his length well to contest shots. He is good with his feet in terms of getting them set, but when he gets blown by, he really gets blown by. But yeah, I mean, I guess the best place to start is there's this one example, Kennedy Chandler. I don't know if the listeners, viewers like know about him, but he's an NBA prospect. There was a game against Tennessee, I think in February, under 10 seconds left in the first half. They set a ball screen well above the 3-point line. Kennedy Chandler comes off of it, attacks. Jalen is very disciplined defensively, so he stays in his deep drop, even though the big is super high up and it's, the end of the quarter. And then, even with the big obstructing his view, Jalen is able to like step over and draw the charge. So, it's a recognition of the situation, but it was like the pass and charge, pass and crash, that people want to outlaw. Like he's very good at recognizing when the situation calls for, oh yeah, this is something I can get.
Okay, so when we think about playing drop on the Raptors and the comparison to maybe a guy who's trying to draw charges, right? When we think about 13 charges drawn over 80 games, like Chris Boucher. Chris Boucher is not operating in drop basically ever. If he's in a pick and roll, he's going to play at the level. Maybe they switch, maybe they hedge hard or soft, but typically he's not going to be playing drop. He did the charges mostly in rotation, and the Raptors are not going to be playing drop a ton unless they have an absolutely standout drop defender. Now, is Jalen Williams good enough that he would dictate that for whatever portion of the game the Raptors might actually look to play drop? And then once we get past that, we have to talk about him being viable elsewhere on the floor to dictate that he's even out there playing defense. So, as far as being a drop defender, not only dissuading, because the Raptors love to go high and then tag behind or rotate behind. So if they're going to quell that, how good is he at dissuading the roller and the guy on ball in a more conservative way? Because the Raptors found success, obviously, getting the ball out of hands, but gave up a lot of corner triples as well.
Right. So I think it presents an interesting choice, right? Because I don't necessarily know what the roster makeup is going to look like next season fully, but we know who their 4 or 5 guys are, right? Or their biggest four, their most important guys. You just want, in my estimation, like obviously you want to hit on a pick in the early second round, but the early second round affords you the opportunity to take players, prospects that you can develop. Maybe it's the lower risk, lower end. I don't necessarily know, honestly, if Jalen is good enough to dictate that you should play drop. Um, my biggest thing in like even bringing his name up in Raptors draft conversation is the stuff he can do complements this team well enough while providing somewhat of a switch up. If you are playing drop, it's a way to keep everybody in front, right? Don't necessarily know if Nick Nurse will bend any more than he has in terms of his philosophy, because I heard your season interview with Lewis Atzman, right? He bent as much as possible to accommodate his team philosophically this season, and they had more success than they maybe otherwise would have if he was just strict with that. So maybe if he's not playing the main guys, there's a slight shift to keep, because bench guys aren't, they can't really kill you in the way that like the starters do, and staggering minutes and all of that. So perhaps a different coverage. I don't necessarily know if that will work, but Jalen is a very high feel player. He recognizes situations super quickly, which taking charges isn't something to be laughed at in college, and certainly not in the league. But that requires a certain level of like, this is happening on this side. If all I have to do is get to here. He's not a great athlete in the conventional sense, so when he gets beat, he gets beat. Like he got blown by college basketball players. So the level of athleticism in the league is like obviously much higher. So I mean, defensively, if you're asking him to not be in drop, then I don't know how that will look because I mean, he like I said, he's got length. He when he gets his feet set, he's great. He recognizes what guys can and can't do. If the Raptors are playing zone or different, changing up with different schemes, then that he'll be more effective with that. But yeah, his active hands, his length, I think that might be the selling point because every now and then you just want to keep something in front.
If he's asked to play a different style, because the Raptors, famously that democratic rim protection that they had going on, the heavy rotation. Thaddeus Young is an example of a guy who's long, who moves well for his age relative to the league, and a guy who used to be a plus movement guy, but isn't currently and operates on smarts. And he had really great regular season minutes for the Raptors and so playoff minutes. He's a guy who achieved success in the Raptors system despite not being explosive with length, just being kind of heady with length. And
Right.
is there any chance that Jalen can achieve a similar outcome? Does he read the floor well enough as a rotator, as a guy who steps out? Is he good at giving space to drivers on closeouts so that they come to him rather than him, reaching out to them and then losing them on the drive? It's stuff like that.
Yeah, I think so. I think the other thing like I want to factor in as as a basketballer is like I like factoring in like who guys play for. And Eric Musselman was a former NBA coach. He was a pretty successful. I think it was the D League at that point, but yeah, has coached all over the place, and there's there's so much value in like learning that and his. I think you've referred to it as like court mapping, coupled that with his processing speed. Like I think Thaddeus Young is like a reasonable. If you had to plug him into a very specific person's role now, that's as good as any to start. But yeah, he reads situations well. I think. I just don't think that he was asked to do like as definitely not as much as an NBA team will ask him to do, and certainly not nearly as much as like the Raptors might ask him to do. But like I said, he's somebody who you can sort of bring on slow. I think he'll get stuff right away. It's just a matter of getting to the right spots at the right times. Yeah, I don't necessarily know if his foot speed will be able to get him to where he needs to be, but he will definitely be able to read and understand situations as they're happening. Um, we could talk about this more with the offense, but Francis, shout out Francis, um, told me that I think one of the things with Jalen that he pointed out to me is that he will try to outthink players. Whether it's good or bad, and that's something that I think it's not necessarily what Scotty Barnes does, but Scotty will take the less conventional route, right? And so like if you think about Scotty in transition, like I've heard you talk about this, like you take the one passing angle, the most obvious passing angle, the one everyone wants to take, like, and then he'll find the least um the least reasonable angle, and he'll throw that. He has the daring to do that. I think Jalen does that too, but like defensively, but sort of as a way to make up for his athletic shortcomings.
Route efficiency, maybe, right? Like knowing where to cheat. Is that kind of
Yes,
what you're getting at? Okay.
yes, yes, yes.
So we'll talk about this at the very end of it, but let's talk about offensively because if he's kind of an odd fit for the defense and you have to guess like, okay, is his read of the game, is his feel for the game going to catch up these, at least in the Raptor scheme, physical shortcomings of what they expect from guys who play the front court? What is he doing offensively that would fit with the Raptors? What are his skills that pop, and are they expected to pop at the NBA level?
So I think that again, this is where for me the coaching comes in. Passing first and foremost. I think he's an outstanding passer. Short roll, in delay, top of the key, high low, super crafty. He knows how to sell, throw. And he threads a needle on a back cut like nobody's business. I've heard you talk about horns flex or horns chin. Those actions where when he sets that screen and then he pops out, like he can his processing speed, I think, is really quick. And so he'll see the angle or he'll know, okay, if this isn't here, then I'm looking here. Like this is where like I'm going to find something. And like obviously highlights don't indicate everything. I strongly suggest everybody watch full games and things. But if you are watching the highlights, his passing highlights, it's quick decision making. As when he gets it, it's boom. He knows the defense is shifted. I'm throwing it that way. No hesitation at all. So, you know, I think passing is his greatest key. And when you have a guy like Pascal Siakam, like OG Ananobi, you know, Fred, those are guys who you give them a slight advantage and they'll take that advantage and they'll expand on it. They'll kill you with their advantage creation and the way they leverage small opportunities. So his passing, I think, is my favorite thing about his game. And I think that that's the one thing that we can scale that you will see at the NBA level, like work right away. It might not pop off the page in a way that like a ball dominant anyone really somebody who has the ball more often than not, like it won't pop right away, but he's not going to make very many mistakes in terms of his reading when he's making plays and passing. He's also a post passer, lower high, right? So if you want to if you, if you want a post hub that's not Fred VanVleet or Pascal Siakam, like yeah, that'll be nice.
Okay, so when we think about you've watched plenty of the Raptors, so you know they run like so much dribble handoff. They do so much pitching above the break and stuff like that. So he can obviously be a connector in those plays, it sounds like. But as far as operating with the danger that Scotty Barnes, as his usage ramps up next year, because Scotty can turn the corner. He can be the keeper. Precious, can be the keeper or can outright, Precious has shown, I think, outlier skills for his position to kind of get his own off the bounce. Is Jalen via, the pick and then like you pick the ball up, you let the guy run by, it clears out for a jumper, he turns the corner. Like what type of skills are we talking about as being a dangerous offensive operator if teams are going to play off of him during these like pitch play or handoff sets?
So I mean, okay. So I guess in terms of shooting, spacing, like a pick and pop big, phew, he attempted just under two threes a game, and he only made like I think it was like point 0.5, or I think that's rounding up. But I think there's plenty of room for improvement on that, because it's not as if the mechanics are wrong, bad, ugly, anything like that. I just think, I mean, I'm not somebody who likes commenting on, oh, if he just does X, then he'll be an above average 3-point shooter in the league.
You're
It's
not you're not gonna talk about the Galvis collapse or anything like that.
um no, because I mean I've helped like younger players and understandably like much lower stakes. It's a long process to get somebody shot better or more efficient. And so like the Raptors development staff, world class. They can speak to it much better than I can. But I do think that a player who is dared to shoot and like will shoot it, recognizing that like that's the best shot you can get out of that situation, is something that's you'd rather have that than like, oh yeah, well, he's not gonna shoot, we're just gonna back off him, and then the play has died. Like he's in terms of screen setting, he's a solid screen setter as far as I can tell. I will not claim to have watched like every single game, but you know like I said, Eric Musselman is a great coach. They deploy screens in a number of ways. So slip, pop, roll, ghost, all of that. Like he's done a bunch of that, and he's somebody who, if you bite on a closeout, he's gonna make you pay. Now, I would maybe like to, until we see like what he's really cooking with, employ like a dribble limit, because I feel like the more dribbles he has to take, the less effective he becomes as a scorer, as a finisher anyway. As a passer, like it's there. Like he's he's figuring stuff out. He's manipulating the defense. He's looking one way, he's seeing the other, and like he's pass fake if he has to. But his floater, I think, leaves a little bit to be desired. I think 20 seconds with Pascal Siakam, like he'll he'll learn some insider secrets, some trade secrets, and then he'll be able to. But yeah, you can rep those out and learn reads for those things, and so he's most definitely, even though he's 6'10", a below the rim scorer. Um, I mean, and we'll contrast that with the other big I'll be talking about, but he's most definitely a below the rim scorer. But I think, you know, a player who's smart enough to recognize his situations and he's crafty enough to throw multiple fakes out of the way, like you can simplify those reads for him, and then you can watch him eat off of the little bit that you give him. So, if he's if you're imagining Scotty Barnes in that keeper play, like that's an easy sell, because like if he does hand it off, and or it's that weave action where it's a multiple. If he hands it off to him, and then let's say Jalen is now dribbling at like OG quick back cut. Like there's nobody better. There have been, like, especially with big men who are handling in that delay action or at the top of the key or whatever, like they can only throw one kind of pass. Either they're throwing it over the top or they're threading the needle like a bounce pass. But he has multiple options, and I've seen him pass fake the bounce pass, reverse pivot, and then kick it out to the opposite side. So he, I think, as a play connector, as a complementary piece, like I think his passing is there. His job is, like, to answer your question finally, like as a screener, like the different things you can do with him, it'll open up more things.
Okay. So the read and react system that Nick Nurse likes to employ, which a lot of it turns out being like read and react to this isolation we have going on. But, you talk about weave, pitch plays, handoffs, delay. That means that like a quick processing big can turn a lot of these actions, if people are willing to cut, into dangerous actions. And maybe that's best applied as a change of pace big coming off the bench, which that is maybe a bit duplicative of Thaddeus Young. They have Thaddeus Young's bird rights. Who knows what they idealize him at? Maybe they really like Jalen and they see him as, kind of, he can provide what Thaddeus may or may not do offensively. And, the corner 3-point shooting from Thaddeus was good, but there's plenty of teams look to the draft to replace outgoing guys all the time. And they try and stack skill sets like the Raptors have been doing. That's interesting to think about. As far as a heady off-ball guy, a below the rim scorer, as you say, this isn't a guy who's going to catch lobs, really. This is a guy who's going to get the ball, pound dribble, body, clear space, and go up. But how does that affect his offensive rebounding? How does that affect his ability to get after it on the glass, which is also something that the Raptors, if you are playing the 3, 4, or 5, and you aren't a good shooter, you're really getting after it. So how does he operate as far as getting extra possessions?
So I mean, that's, I think, the hardest thing to tell in terms of college versus the NBA, because obviously the
Does he have
athleticism.
that dog in him?
um, to be honest, like it's not necessarily something that like stands out, because when he grabs offensive rebounds at the collegiate level, like he's either longer or just bigger than other guys. And so, the offensive rebounding to me is about situation recognition. To me, like if you've heard Dennis Rodman talk about it, like he watched Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and Steve Kerr and Luke Longley for just naming names. He watched them in warm up in practice, and he watched where those shots would come off, and then he would go chase the ball in that direction. So he had a half step or a full step on the defense because he knows where it's going. Jalen, I don't like I said, it's tough for me to say that I personally think he can fit in well with chasing offensive boards because when you're winning on the when you want to leverage stuff like winning weird stuff, not necessarily weird stuff, but like winning margins that like teams don't really try to
Mm-hmm.
win, that's your secret stuff. Jalen is a smart and capable player, and I think if you tell him if you want to play like 15 minutes a night your rookie season, you're gonna get really good at verticality. You're gonna get really good at getting to the spots you need to get to. You're gonna become like the most dynamic screen setter we have relative to your skill level, and you're gonna offensive rebound. And I think he's exactly the type of player who can be like, okay, I'm gonna tick those boxes. That's easy for me. Yeah.
So unseen margins for like a wing or a guard offensively, I think is we as viewers and as analysts typically reward in the dialogue people who their decisions turn into their own usage, not their decisions turn into more efficient usage. So, for example, somebody who cuts against the weak side zone to drag a defender, and then the on ball player gets credit for the skip pass they make to the open shooter. But the weak side zone, that guy could have been a ball hawk on that pass if not for the heady cut made. A guy who's operating the dunker spot, which Jalen Williams may be, at points if he will be in the NBA. How often with the Raptors, who knows? But you shade and motion, you mirror, let's say, a drive that's coming. And as you do so, like you're able to shield that drive from help side defenders without, it's not the Gortat screen, but it's a different type of, keeping the paint clean from other guys. And so Jalen as an off ball player, are there any expectations that he'll be able to grease wheels to be like heady as a cutter, to make him to present well as a short roller, as a roller, which as we know the Raptors don't really have high level players, or at least players that they'll go to, because Pascal and OG both I think are quite accomplished at different parts of it. But yeah, how would Jalen operate both as an off ball guy and as a screening partner?
So, I mean, the most interesting thing about this is that more and more teams are playing zone, right? That's the one thing you can definitely look to and say like, how is he deployed in a zone in college? As a weak side dunker flashing to the nail and then going to strong side dunker and then the other guy clearing through or like going baseline. If he catches the ball at the nail, which it's what you want for every team against the zone, he's making you pay for it in one way or another, and he's finding space with which to operate, with which to exploit the zone. So I think in terms of that, like that works. Like I said, um, on the short roll, I think that's his greatest strength as a passer because I mean, even if you're playing against non NBA competition, like the short roll is a small amount of time with which you have to process and make great decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So, like a short roll to a lob, or a short roll to a kick out opposite three, or a short roll hard dribble, pump fake to get the defense shifted and then skip it to the opposite side. Like he's done all of that stuff. That's all stuff that I have seen for sure him do. So I think there's lots of room for improvement in a lot of aspects, but I think, yeah, I mean the small stuff, right? The stuff you don't really see in the box score. Those are things that he'll help you win the margins you want to win. And regardless of what that is, I think he'll be able to I think I'll be able to make it work.
Okay, so short rolling on the Raptors is actually really important. They do it a lot. They don't do a lot of pick and rolls, which we might see an uptick in next year, honestly, because of Pascal getting a lot more of those possessions as Nick Nurse finally was like, okay, all NBA, go work with the ball in your hand, and we'll actually use screens for you. Pascal gets a lot of attention at the level of the screen, a lot. Be it under and shading over, or a guy stepping up, hard hedge, soft hedge, whatever. Uh, Short rolls happen quite often with him, and he doesn't have the best sight for the guy short rolling. But when he does, typically that short roller is going to operate with quite an advantage because of how much attention Pascal draws. Fred, similarly, he puts guys in short roll positions a lot because he doesn't have the length as a passer to manipulate lanes or the burst to create disruption to get rollers all the way to the rim. And so it sounds like to me, having seen very little Jalen film myself, that the short roll and like delay action, weave action is the best way to utilize him, which more or less is consistent with how they use their potpourri bench bigs. Chris Boucher aside, I would say, but guys like Kem, guys like Thad, that's how they were used when they had those skill sets. And Precious and Boucher weren't able to make those types of reads. So that's interesting. Defensively, it sounds to me like you're betting on his reads for the floor and his length, allowing him to make up for the shortcomings that he has as far as an athlete. So I'm curious, before we, put the nightcap on Jalen, the Jalen conversation, what is your ideal version of Jalen's NBA career? What is he doing well? What is he succeeding at?
Well, I mean, like I said, or just quickly to talk about specific actions, because I mean, this is I think what I'm best at is if you put him in that horns flex action, right? Which, um, yeah, only Fred ghosts that flex screen, but when Fred goes to that flex screen, if he's the handing off big, like I said, he can fake it and then make a read out of that, or he's making the right reads out of the high post or the slots. And in chin action, Horn's chin, when he sets that back screen and then he pops to the ball, he might not need as much time as the guys who didn't operate well out of that specific action because he knows which way guys are leaning already. So when he sets that screen and he's catching the ball, he's made the decision or he knows at least where the guys are. So he's able to throw that pass in a spot that only, your target man is getting it. So in those specific actions, which we know, like I know the Raptors run, you can plug him into there right away. Offensively, like as seamless a fit as you can. Horns flare or horns flex, and then that horns chin, where sometimes they set that screen for Pascal or OG to like seal that punch action. He can throw that over the top, no problem, and he can make sure it's getting to the perfect spot where nobody else is getting to it. So I mean, that sort of answers a little bit of the idealized version as a not necessarily a high post hub, but somebody you can, I mean, you know, eat innings with in terms of your offense doesn't die just because the big man is behind the 3-point line and you're not losing a whole lot. In an ideal world, the length and size and speed that the Raptors already deploy is able to mask his defensive deficiencies in terms of like not having the foot speed to get over there. I don't necessarily know how much athleticism, foot speed, all of that stuff you can, you know, um, hack or like optimize. But the most optimized version of him, as big as he is, his court record is what? How did you
Court
phrase it
mapping?
earlier? Yeah, no,
Court.
no, but the when
Oh,
he
court coverage.
recognized, yes, the latter. Yeah. So that when he does that stuff, and like there's like three other 6'9", 6'10" guys, 6'8", 6'7", guys around him with that length, like you're stopping everything, and like all you need are guys heady enough to be able to say like, oh, that's taken away. I gotta go here. That's taken away. I'm good. I've heard you talk about this again with Lewis. The fan base and like many other writers, they when it's Chris Boucher or Pascal Siakam recognizing or looking around and trying to find where he has to cover ground or where he has to like cover up for a teammate who's made a mistake, like oftentimes it looks like he's making the mistake. But in reality, he's trying to make up for a teammate. I think Jalen fits in with that. If he moved as quickly as Pascal, I mean he'd be much higher in the draft. But that's a slower footed, I guess, version of that is maybe the idealized version.
That's good to hear. If they were to select him, because when we think about, as I talked about earlier, Thad Young, who ended up being the plus minus king of the Raptors, is that you don't need the ferocious speed and length at every position. You can have a guy plug in, and if he understands the scheme well enough and can, you know, is processing what the defense is doing well enough and recognizing the patterns of their decision making, you can cheat within the scheme and find a lot of success. So, uh, Thad, while I'm not making the Thad comparison, seeing a guy like Thad find success means that there's different routes to success within the Raptors scheme defensively than just being Pascal or OG. Well, Fred is also, kind of proves that theory. The corollary, the Fred corollary, as it were. We're going to talk about Ismael Kamagate and Dalen Terry. Before we do so, I'm going to read a little ad to you, listener, viewer. So, do you want to get to the top of your game? Jack Health at www.jack.health is an online service for men's health that handles the doctor's appointment, the prescription, and the shipping, which, by the way, is free. All you need to do is stay at home and relax. They've got stuff for sexual health, daily health, hair and skin, you name it. Order what you want, fill out some questions, and get it shipped straight to you. Skip having to lay out all your medical issues in the clinic waiting room and keep your private business private. Free shipping and easy prescriptions. Boost your game and do it all from the privacy of your own home at www.jack.health. Evan, now that we're fully optimized with our sexual health, hair, and skin, let's talk about Ismael Kamagate. Is he fully optimized as a basketball player?
Oh, whew. I I actually don't know. I think I think he's a guy who his highlights pop. His highlights pop so much more than a Jalen. Supposedly he's about 6'11" with a 7'3" wingspan, something like that. I think he might be about 6'9" and a half, 6'10", something like that.
They're
But
lying.
they might be,
Boost in
yeah,
height.
yeah. Um, it's a plus, I guess, for certain people. I've seen some of Raptors Twitter talk about this. He is French, so for whatever that's worth. No, but he's
Literally, everything is unimportant until it's important. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, this guy, he's French. And it's like, oh, does that matter? Yes, yeah, of course it matters because of, A and B reasoning. It's classic stuff like that.
uh, wait, yeah. So he's 21, which it's not. I mean, it's not old, obviously. But he's not the youngest guy. Um,
Midlife crisis ensues. 21 isn't old.
um, but so I mean, there are a lot of different things, and like I said, the thing I let off with is like his highlights really pop. Like that's important, because highlights can be deceiving. With him, he's such an unbelievably high motor player that it almost doesn't matter if he's 6'10" or 6'11" because he's gonna make up that ground. He's going to work. Um, I mean, his strongest asset, I think, is his ability to time blocking shots because to be long, to be athletic, that's one thing. But to be able to actually catch guys at the peak of their release, or like if you're talking a stereotypical post up and a guy puts his shoulder into you and goes up for a jump hook, like to be able to be right there instead of somebody who's chasing blocks who's more foul prone, like that's the perfect version. Don't necessarily know if he's the best at shot block timing in his class, but I would wager he's up there if there was some sort of metric. Um, yeah, I think he'd be right up there. So, um,
How does he
yeah,
move defensively? Like, does that read of like timing steps and timing the movements, like like when guys time shots, blocking shots well, you're what that is guys are reading the gather, they're reading the body language here, and they're counting steps typically. When is the point of no return for the guy on ball? And then you leap, while also hopefully blanketing passing angles as well at the same time. So does that read of singular players, does that feel for defense translate to kind of reading a bunch of different guys at once and knowing where to be and not getting back cut and not, and having good rotation timing and all that kind of stuff?
hard to say because I mean the, the what is it, the LNB Pro A, the top tier basketball division in France, they're not they're not NBA players, but it, his 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 length and ability to quickly get off the ground, to recognize situations, it works a little bit too with his cutting, and like we'll save the offensive side of the ball a little later. But I think it's there. I think I would really like to see him in a situation where he is actually defending NBA players, and I don't think he went to the combine because, like, I mean, if you're an international prospect and you're not as tall as you say you are, that works against you, right? So um, he's at his best in drop coverage. I think um, he's a little switchable, a little, but I think that he works really hard to get to the spots he thinks he has to get to, and he does recognize situations well, not as well as Jalen if we're comparing the two, but it's hard to compare the two, just based on what I've seen, the sample size. Um,
Competition too as well. It's
yeah,
kind of, yeah.
absolutely. But like, occasionally gets switched on to guys. Don't necessarily know if I would feel comfortable like with him um, guarding like NBA players, one perimeter NBA players like one on one full time, because I think that's when he's gonna get baited into like a bunch of stuff. Being a young big man who's raw and your best traits are on defense, like those cases prove to take a little time in the NBA, because like I think the hardest thing for a young player in the NBA to do is to be a big man learning NBA defense at NBA speed. Like that's so hard. So I think it'll take him a little bit of time. Like I said, similar to Jalen, if you take him early second round, there's there's not as much expectation, and so there'll be time for him to develop. Um, but I think he has certain weaknesses. I don't necessarily know if it's hip mobility or lateral speed or the ability to, maybe it's improper footwork. That one of the downsides of being such a great athlete is you don't necessarily know if his footwork bad. Well, it doesn't matter. He blocked the shot. Like that's I think a lot of what people care about at a certain point. Like how can we use him to make our scheme successful? If his footwork was a little better, then maybe he'd be a lot better. So, that's for an NBA development coach to take a look at, assess, and okay, then we're good there. But I think he has a lot of potential. He's just so raw. I mean, he also hustles. He works really hard. And, just because you have a high motor doesn't necessarily mean that like I've seen guys with high motor get beat, and then when they're beat, they're beat. But he hustles a lot defensively. So for what it's worth, there's that.
Offensively, what is I guess, the outlier skill that you most want to succeed at the NBA level, if there is one? And then on the other side of things, what do you think are things that he could achieve within the Raptors system if he were drafted immediately?
The jumper is something that is I don't really like it. I've heard and seen people I respect greatly talk about um, his face up game is there's something there. There's something to it. There's something to his mid range. I don't necessarily like it as much as those people do because it's it feels inconsistent to me depending on how many dribbles he takes or what angle he's coming from. Like it's not. And again, this might be a footwork thing. So if you clean that up, maybe it works. But I haven't seen him take 3 pointers, so I won't speak to any of that. But he's an inside perimeter threat. His biggest skill is that he wants to and tries to dunk everything, everything. Um, he wants to play above the rim. He's a capable passer. I don't think he is. Again, it's hard to compare the two because of circumstance and competition. But I don't think he's as natural a passer as Jalen. But he makes the right reads. So whether that was coached up,
What types of passes have you seen him make?
uh, so not necessarily on the roll, but if you imagine a team blitzing the ball handler before he can get a chance to use the screen. Um, his ability to
Hmm.
pop into space and then like make reads out of that. Or like sometimes he'll catch in the post. He'll take one dribble to back a guy in, and if he doesn't budge, then he will try to step through or like reverse pivot into a pass. And the footwork is it's not ideal, but even if it's a turnover, you I can sort of tell that like the intention, what he was looking for was it's good process. So it's stuff with movement. I think he's a capable and smart cutter, but I don't necessarily know if those are like, okay, well, if this is happening in the coverage, if you see this against the zone, these are the spots that are going to be open, or if it's like intuitive. But that doesn't really matter because he's getting to the spots he needs to get to in order to make himself, if not a threat, a connector. So,
Mm,
yeah.
okay.
Like I said, the more dribbles he takes, I think the more in trouble you get. So, yeah, one or two dribbles if he can't get to where he needs to go. He's hopefully making the right read. If not, like it gets a little messy from there.
So if we think about Jalen succeeding in what we discussed in these quick read and react situations, but maybe struggling to input his size or length as an offensive rebounder, and also the below the rim finishing, all these things are stuff that he has to navigate. Is it maybe how is Kamagate as far as getting after it on the offensive glass, as far as like a guy who finishes contested at the rim? Because that's, the Raptors, Fred and Pascal both doubled at a top 10 frequency in the NBA. The ball is coming to you not always beyond like above the break, not always in the perimeter, but sometimes it's going to guys who are going to be facing rotating bigs, but they're going to be in the vicinity to finish. Would you expect that if the ball squirts to him in the paint, that is a finish? Is it just an attempt with like a low efficiency, or is he going to find a way to put the ball in the hoop more
I
often than
think
not?
that's something that I think it will depend on what he like actually looks like. That's where the difference between like 6'9.5" versus 6'11" is. He's gonna try and dunk everything. Like when I say he's going to try and dunk everything, I mean it might not be the best decision, but like he wants to. And to me, that want, which is like it feels like such a silly thing to say, but the want to do that, the want to offensive rebound, the want to find a way to finish, like he's not dunking it necessarily hell or high water. Like if he has the chance for a putback and he has to contort his body in a way, even if it's not the best attempt, even if it doesn't end up as the best attempt, like I've seen him finish a little bit with his left hand. Like the want to dunk and the want to get after the glass if you're a big with a high motor and great leaping ability, I think it would surprise me more if he weren't a capable and effective offensive rebounder than the other way.
Mm, okay, that's good to hear. So we see maybe there's something in the mid post as far as providing his own offense or being somebody he tosses to. Maybe these things pop off, maybe they don't. But it's stuff he's trying at least in France a little bit.
Yeah, flashes of a mid range. Like I said, don't necessarily know if I trust it, but if he can face up and pull from there, I trust that more than I do one dribble, two dribble.
Okay.
The one dribble, if he's going left, it depends on where on the floor he is. But like if he takes a dribble with his left hand, or if he's going right, like from what I've seen, like that stuff can look a little different. But if he can just catch, maybe with his back to the basket at the elbow, quick rip, face up, pull up, I trust that. So, and the other thing is he's a. It'd be harsh, I think, to say like I don't think he's a good screen setter. I think he's a
Well, he's quite wiry right now.
yes,
That's
he's a
tough at the
decent
NBA
screen
level.
setter, but he loves a slip because he's fast, he's quick. So he dives. There we go. The best way to say it is I don't necessarily know if he's a hard screen and roll big, but when you give him the opportunity to dive to the basket, right? He's gonna try to get there. And like I said, he's a good cutter, so even if he's not setting if he's not laying guys out with setting the screens, he's gonna roll really hard. So he wants to make himself a lob threat, and he did. So I mean, you'll see
Would
that
that
in all of the highlights.
would that be the difference of like Clint Capella rolls to the basket, John Collins dives? Like, does that make sense in your mind
Yes.
as far
Yeah.
as the difference? Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think yeah, yeah, I didn't think about that, but yeah, that's probably like the most optimized version probably would be that because he's wiry, he's he's long, he's athletic, and he wants to dunk everything. So even if he's not setting that screen, like he can make himself available as an above the rim
Mm.
as a lob threat.
That's I think in my mind that's how I differentiate because there's like the heady short rollers who are like they mirror and they maintain the pocket pass and the lob over top and the wrap isn't typically something, but there's rollers like Capella who he really does a great job of mirroring the ball handler, but then there's guys who they're racing to airspace. Like, they're not competing with the pocket pass. They're not competing with these lanes, but they're thinking like I can get to airspace that the drop or the hedge or whatever can't. So I'm like, I'm racing to this spot. If the ball gets there, then we're good. And like, is that more so how he operates as a pick and roll guy?
Yeah, I think so. Based on what I've seen, like I said, the level of NBA ball handlers versus the ones in the French league, you know, yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But if he can get to there, I think the heady short roll guys. That's more of Jalen. The guys who are always doing this, pointing up, because that's where they want it. Like that's Kamagate.
Okay. Kamagate. Any parting shots about Kamagate before we move on to Dalen?
Yeah. In terms of what we talked about with Jalen, like Kamagate is best in a drop, and I know I already talked about that, but I think if you're just telling me that it's this guy in drop, oh, sorry, forgot this one thing. I forgot to tell you about. There's his ability to get off the ground, his length and his recognition of the situation is there was this one play in particular where I was just he's below the level of the screen, and a ball handler steps into a three, right? And this is let's say it's on the right wing if you're just imagining it. He he's able to. It takes recognition to be below the level of the screen, that far below the level of the screen, and see that a ball handler is pulling up when you're playing drop and still be able to contest. I don't necessarily know if he got the block. There's one play in particular, and like I don't want to butcher the French team's name, so like I will send it to you, and if like you want to tweet it out or whatever. But he's able to contest a 3-point shooter, and he's like right in that airspace. Like he looks like he's blocking the shot. I mean, and that fits right into what the Raptors do, their whole thing. But recognition, court mapping, and the ability to get off the ground and have the length to actually do that, like that's huge, I think. So that's my biggest thing with him is the the most idealized version of him is like, yeah, it's John Collins on offense, and then I don't know, pick a drop big who can close space quickly and step to the level with like great footwork. Because that's I think that's the thing stopping Kamagate the most, maybe. It might be hip mobility, it might be flexibility, it might be agility. Um, but like the want is there. Hey, yeah, he could be in about 2-3 years. Like that could be he could have some really oh wow moments.
Mm. Okay. Dalen Terry, uh, teammate of Christian Coloco, who, at Arizona, I believe. So it's Mathurin, Coloco, and Terry, I believe, are their three prospects coming out of there. Terry, a very interesting pairing with Coloco, and I'm curious what your thoughts are of him. Just the cliff notes or the flashbulb when you think of Dalen Terry, what pops?
Um, defense. He's about 6'7". He long, long arms. I want to say like I think maybe 7'1" wingspan, something like that. That's wrong. Sorry, but he's got long arms. Is the point? I don't know if that's the exact measurement. He's aggressive on defense, maybe over aggressive. They already have a point guard. They already have the Raptors already have a big point guard, and I think the ball works best when it's in Scotty or Pascal's hands, or I mean Fred. But you know, if you're telling me that like you plucked Terry straight out of Arizona and into the Raptors training camp, and I had to, if I knew nothing about him and I had to pick him out from there, like I don't think I would be able to identify who is because he's very aggressive defensively. He was played as the point guard a lot of the time, or I mean maybe point guard isn't fair, but like ball handler
Initiator,
bringing
is that like,
yes,
yeah.
initiators perfect. Um, you know, Mathurin is like he was the guy who was taking a lot of their shots, and rightfully so. But as a point guard, I think the numbers were something like four. It was a 4 to 1.5, 1.6 assist to turnover ratio, and like that's not the best thing. But if you're scaling that down to being a secondary or tertiary ball handler, which I mean I've heard you talk about this, like there's very little second side action now, but especially like OG would have been a second side all star, but the shooting went away, so he had to play a lot in isolation. But like if you want to scale that down, like that's the perfect thing for I think a player like Terry is like a more minimized role where he's not the point guard, but having played point guard, he can make certain reads, and like that's really great. I think he's got a
Like
little bit of
a
explosive.
long closeout. What's the expectation? Like he gets a long closeout and he gets to put the ball on the ground. And there's maybe somebody steps up, but like how is he punching against the weak side?
Oh, um, he's got a. He's pretty athletic. Um, we're not talking about wings at the moment, so it's hard to. But I think relative to the field, relative to Division 1 college basketball, he's athletic. He's got a first step that can get him places. He's pretty athletic. I've seen him um, finish at the rim, dunks that I wasn't expecting. I don't necessarily know. Maybe a team isn't paying attention, so it's a hard closeout. That's the most ideal world for him. He's I don't know. It's tough to say again for me because like I don't want to say like, oh yeah, his shot form. All you have to do is this. But I think you get him working with a professional development staff, and again, one as good as the Raptors. I'll keep um, singing their praises. That jumper can be. I don't think it has to be salvaged, but I think it can be optimized. And when you make that thing a little more efficient, and now you can play in between. Is like, am I closing out hard? If I close out hard, he'll blow by. But he's becoming a better shooter, so am I really just gonna leave him? I think even a soft closeout, he can still get by guys. And again, college basketball players are not NBA players, so like the difference in terms of like that first step, that burst, it remains to be seen. But I think it could be good. I think that 6'7", switchable because like you know over aggressive, like I said, but over aggressive, you as a coach you'd be more okay with somebody who's over aggressive and you try to like ratchet them down instead of having to crank a guy up. Over aggressive, I think he made an all defensive team in his conference. Could be mistaken about that, but yeah, over aggressive, tamped down could be a solid fit, the most seamless fit I think of these guys because he was a point guard, like I said. I'm just repeating myself at this point, but like there's nothing to me that doesn't scream Raptors, to be honest.
So for the listener or viewer who's saying, why is this guy at the back end of the podcast? If he screams Raptors, if he, is like this hyper aggressive defender who has defensive accolades, and he has these like kind of these ball skills at plus size, it's because we're not expecting Dalen Terry to be available at 33. So that's why it's just we'll talk about him because he's an exciting prospect, and like there's fit there for sure, but he's probably a long shot to fall, which is also why, like, leading up to the 2020 draft, McDaniels wasn't talked about a bunch because it's like, how could McDaniels fall to the Raptors? And he ended up falling one pick away as it was. But yeah, it's interesting. But is there anything else that you think Raptors fans should know about Dalen Terry? Like, I think we discussed aggressiveness, but is that aggressiveness, manifesting in on-ball defense? Is he like trying to like lock guys in between his knees? Is he trying to swallow up ball handlers? Or is this a guy who's, in weak side and cheating pick and rolls by sliding over and all that kind of stuff? Is he jumping passing lanes? What does it look like?
I mean, it's mostly hmm, it's in a lot of different ways. I think when I watched him, and I think the game that stands out to me is his final game of the season. It was against Houston, where it was, if you don't know who this player is, did I want him to do just a little bit more? I did, but I don't necessarily know if that's what he was called upon to do. Um, but defensively, like I think he can get a little caught up in, I don't want to say undisciplined because I don't think that's fair. But I think he is good offensively because when he attacks, like he's making the decision to attack, but he can be a little unselfish at times. Defensively, he's a solid defender who has all the tools, but maybe like here's what it is. I think he could stand to take some of the aggressiveness he has as an on ball point of attack, or switch defender and put that into offense, because like it's that's what it is to me, is that defense. I wish, okay, play with balance, play with poise. You're unselfish to a fault offensively. Like be unselfish to a fault defensively, and like don't get caught up in not necessarily individual matchups, but you can do a little more than you are doing right now on offense. And you could stand to do a little less on defense. So that's what I think that's the best way to distill it down.
Okay. That's Dalen Terry, ladies and gentlemen. So if you come away from this podcast thinking that the Raptors should choose one of Jaylin Williams, Ismael Kamagate, or Dalen Terry, Evin has done a good job, I think. And yeah, so I hope that you feel like these three prospects were well covered. I hope that you feel like you've learned quite a bit about each one of them, all the different interesting like quirks of their games. And Evin Gualberto, coach, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, of course. When you asked me to do this, I was like, I don't know if talking about draft guys is my thing, but like, I don't know. Like talking to you. You find a way to ask people questions that normally aren't asked. You take the most intriguing angles. You're like Scotty Barnes in that way. When people are expecting you to do one thing, you're like, nope, pocket pass. This is a dime this way.
You expect a basketball question, but I ask you, what was the first thing you thought about when you woke up this morning? Is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it was off the pod, so I don't think people will know the reference. But yeah, basically.
um yeah, we've talked about so much NBA together, you and I. I believe I've spent more time talking NBA consumption with you than anybody else. And so I thought, like, now that you finally watched a bunch of college, and you always are very scared to project things, I was like, yeah, let me get him out here to project some things. So that's kind of where we are. So thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, of course, man. Love your
Of
stuff.
course. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Listener, viewer, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, we're going to get out of here. So take care and we'll see ya.